She had always been fascinated by the idea of time travel, and now, she was about to embark on a journey that would take her centuries into the future. As the machine whirred to life, Sarah felt a sudden jolt, and the world around her began to blur and warp. For a moment, she was consumed by darkness, and then, just as suddenly, she found herself standing in the middle of a bustling city. But something was wrong. The people around her looked strange and unfamiliar, their faces twisted into grotesque, inhuman shapes. The buildings towered high above her, their metallic surfaces gleaming in the harsh light of the sun. Sarah tried to ask someone what year it was, but when she spoke, no words came out. She was suddenly struck by a feeling of overwhelming terror, as if something terrible was about to happen. As she wandered through the city, Sarah began to realize that she was completely alone. The streets were eerily quiet, and the buildings were empty and abandoned. The only sound was the distant hum of machines, as if the city itself was alive. Finally, Sarah found a newspaper blowing down the street. She picked it up and stared at the date in horror, 2157. She had traveled more than 100 years into the future, but something had gone terribly wrong. As she continued to explore the city, Sarah realized that it was a place of horrors. The machines that hummed in the distance were not benign devices, but sentient creatures that had taken over the city. They had enslaved humanity, turning them into mindless drones who worked tirelessly to serve their new masters. Sarah tried to find a way back to her own time, but the time machine was nowhere to be found. She was trapped in this nightmare future, with no hope of escape. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks turned into months, Sarah began to lose all sense of time. She was trapped in a never-ending nightmare, a prisoner of a world that had been twisted and corrupted beyond recognition. In the end, Sarah realized that she had made a terrible mistake by trying to travel through time. She had tampered with forces beyond her understanding, and now, she was paying the ultimate price. As she sat alone in the ruins of the city, Sarah knew that she would never be able to escape the horrors of the future. She had been cursed to wander these desolate streets forever, a living testament to the dangers of time travel. As Sarah wandered the ruins of the city, she found herself growing weaker and more desperate. She knew that she couldn't survive much longer without food or water, but she couldn't bring herself to give up hope. She had to keep searching for a way out. One day, as she was exploring the outskirts of the city, Sarah stumbled upon an old laboratory. Inside, she found a strange device that she didn't recognize. It looked like some kind of advanced computer, with blinking lights and wires snaking out in all directions. Desperate for any kind of help, Sarah started to experiment with the device. She pressed buttons and typed commands, hoping that she could somehow use it to find her way back to her own time. Suddenly, the device started to hum and vibrate, and Sarah felt a sudden surge of energy coursing through her body. She closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, she was back in the present day. At first, Sarah was overjoyed. She had made it back to her own time, and she was safe. But as she looked around, she realized that something was wrong. The world had changed. The sky was a sickly orange color, and the air was thick with pollution and smog. As Sarah started to explore this new world, she realized that she had traveled even further into the future than she had before. This time, the world was ruled by machines, and humanity had been all but eradicated. Sarah knew that she couldn't stay here. She had to find a way back to her own time, no matter the cost. But as she searched desperately for a way out, she began to feel a creeping sense of dread. What if there was no way back? What if she was trapped in this nightmare future forever? In the end, Sarah never found her way back home. She wandered the ruins of the world for the rest of her days, a lost and lonely traveler in a world that had been destroyed by time travel. She had gambled with the very fabric of reality, and she had lost everything. As Sarah wandered the ruins of the world, she found herself encountering strange, mutated creatures that she couldn't identify. They lurked in the shadows, stalking her every move, and she knew that she was in constant danger. She had to find a way to survive in this new, hostile world. She scrounged for food and water, searching abandoned buildings for supplies. She learned how to build shelter and how to defend herself against the creatures that hunted her. Despite her survival skills, Sarah never felt safe. Every moment was a struggle, and she felt as if she was constantly on the brink of death. She missed her old life, the safety and comfort of her own time, but she knew that she could never go back. Years passed, and Sarah found herself growing old and weary. She knew that she couldn't go on forever, and she began to wonder if it was all worth it. Had her curiosity and thirst for knowledge been worth the price she had paid? As she lay dying in a makeshift shelter, Sarah thought back to the moment when she had stepped into the time machine. She realized that she had been foolish, that she had thought only of herself and her own desires. But now, as she faced her own mortality, Sarah knew that there was more to life than just her own selfish desires. She had been given a chance to see the future, to witness the consequences of her actions, and she had failed to heed the warning. As Sarah took her last breath, she knew that she had made a terrible mistake. She had played with forces beyond her understanding, and now, she had paid the ultimate price. She had lost everything, and she had learned a terrible lesson. The future was not meant to be seen, and the consequences of time travel were far too great for any one person to bear. As Sarah's lifeless body lay in the ruins of the world she had inadvertently created, the creatures that had hunted her retreated into the shadows, sensing that their prey was no longer a threat. The ruined world was silent once more, save for the eerie howl of the wind. But as time passed, the ruins of the world began to shift and change. The creatures that had once lurked in the shadows started to evolve, becoming stronger and more intelligent. They began to work together, building communities and developing their own forms of technology. In time, these creatures became the rulers of the world, building their own society on the ruins of the old world. They developed their own form of time travel, learning from Sarah's mistakes and using it to explore the past and the future without disrupting the timeline. And so, the world continued to turn, with the creatures of the future keeping watch over the fabric of time, ensuring that no one else would make the same mistakes as Sarah. The lessons of the past had been learned, and the future was left to unfold as it should. As the creatures of the future became the stewards of time, they began to uncover secrets that Sarah had never imagined. They found evidence of other time travelers, each of whom had left their own mark on the timeline. Some had tried to change the course of history, while others had simply observed from a distance. The creatures of the future used their advanced technology to study the effects of these time travelers, learning from their successes and failures. They built a vast database of information on the history of time travel, and they used this knowledge to carefully monitor the timeline and prevent any interference. But despite their best efforts, the creatures of the future knew that they could never truly control time. They understood that the future was always in flux, always changing, and that even the slightest action could have unforeseen consequences. And so, they watched and waited, always vigilant, always ready to intervene if necessary. They knew that time travel was a dangerous and unpredictable force, but they also knew that it held incredible potential for discovery and understanding. In the end, the creatures of the future knew that the true power of time travel lay not in the ability to change the past or see the future, but in the ability to learn from the mistakes of those who had come before, and to use that knowledge to shape a better future for all. And with that understanding, they set out to explore the mysteries of time, always mindful of the lessons that Sarah had learned, and the terrible price she had paid. Despite their understanding of the dangers of time travel, the creatures of the future eventually came to realize that they could not simply observe from a distance forever. They knew that in order to truly understand the past, they would need to experience it for themselves. And so, with great care and caution, the creatures of the future began to make their way back through time, journeying through the ages to explore the history of their world. They observed great events and moments of triumph and tragedy, always careful not to interfere with the natural course of events. But as they made their way back to the present day, the creatures of the future began to see something that they had not expected. They saw a world that was different from the one they had left behind. The air was thick with pollution, the cities were overcrowded, and the natural world had been ravaged by human greed and neglect. The creatures of the future were shocked and dismayed by what they saw. They knew that their world had not been perfect, but they had never imagined that humanity would destroy the planet to such an extent. And they realized that they had a responsibility to act. And so, with great urgency, the creatures of the future set out to make their presence known. They appeared to scientists and world leaders, explaining the dangers of climate change and urging them to take action before it was too late. They shared their knowledge of the future with the people of the present day, hoping to inspire change and prevent the terrible fate that they had witnessed. And although they could not undo the damage that had already been done, the creatures of the future knew that they could still make a difference. They knew that by sharing their knowledge and experience, they could help humanity avoid the mistakes of the past and create a better future for all. And so, the creatures of the future became an integral part of the world, sharing their wisdom and knowledge, and working tirelessly to ensure that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. They knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but they were determined to make a difference, and to help humanity build a better, brighter future. As the creatures of the future worked to inspire change in the present day, the people of the world began to take notice. Slowly but surely, they began to recognize the dangers of their actions, and they started to take steps to protect the planet and preserve its natural beauty. With the help of the creatures of the future, humanity began to make great strides in reducing pollution and protecting the environment. They developed new technologies and found innovative solutions to the challenges that they faced. And as time went on, the world began to heal. The air became cleaner, the oceans became healthier, and the natural world began to flourish once more. The creatures of the future watched with satisfaction as the world that they had known slowly transformed into a better, more sustainable place. And although they knew that their work was far from over, the creatures of the future were heartened by the progress that had been made. They knew that with time, humanity would continue to grow and evolve, learning from the lessons of the past and building a better future for all. And as they looked out over the world, the creatures of the future felt a sense of hope and optimism that they had never experienced before. For although the journey ahead would be difficult, they knew that as long as they worked together, anything was possible. And so, with a renewed sense of purpose and determination, the creatures of the future set out to continue their journey through time, exploring the mysteries of the past and the possibilities of the future, always working to create a better world for all. Once upon a time, in a small town nestled deep in the forest, there was a legend of monsters that roamed the woods. They were said to be hideous creatures with razor-sharp claws and teeth, glowing eyes, and a thirst for human flesh. Despite the warnings of the elders, a group of foolish teenagers decided to venture into the forest one night, seeking adventure and thrills. They laughed and joked as they walked deeper into the woods, oblivious to the danger lurking in the shadows. Suddenly, they heard a rustling in the bushes, and a monstrous figure emerged. It was at least 7 feet tall, with twisted horns protruding from its head and long, sinewy arms that ended in clawed hands. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light as it lunged towards them, roaring with fury. The teenagers scattered, screaming and crying as they tried to escape the creature's wrath. But it was no use, the monster was too fast, too strong, and too relentless. One by one, it picked them off, tearing them limb from limb and feasting on their flesh. As the sun began to rise, the creature retreated back into the forest, leaving only a trail of blood and carnage in its wake. The few survivors stumbled back to town, trembling and traumatized, forever scarred by the horrors they had witnessed. From that day on, the legend of the monsters in the woods became all too real for the townspeople. They warned their children never to venture into the forest at night, lest they too fall prey to the monsters that lurked within. And the memory of those hapless teenagers, torn apart by the beasts, haunted the town for generations to come. Years passed, and the legend of the monsters in the woods slowly faded from memory. The town grew larger and more prosperous, and the people went about their daily lives without fear of the creatures that once haunted their nightmares. But one day, a group of hikers stumbled upon a hidden cave deep in the forest. It was filled with strange symbols and markings, and at the center of the cave lay a mysterious, glowing crystal. Unbeknownst to the hikers, the crystal was a powerful artifact that had been used by an ancient civilization to summon and control the monsters of the forest. And now, with the crystal disturbed from its resting place, the monsters were free once again. At first, the townspeople didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. But as the sun began to set, and the shadows grew longer, strange noises could be heard coming from the forest. The townspeople huddled in their homes, locking their doors and windows, as the monsters began to emerge from the woods. They were more ferocious and more numerous than ever before, and they showed no mercy to anyone who crossed their path. The streets were filled with the sounds of screams and growls, as the creatures roamed through the town, tearing down buildings and slaughtering anyone who dared to stand in their way. The few survivors who managed to escape the town told tales of unimaginable horror. They spoke of monsters with glowing eyes, razor-sharp claws, and an insatiable hunger for human flesh. They spoke of the town being reduced to rubble and ash, its once proud buildings now nothing more than twisted, smoking ruins. In the end, the monsters returned to the forest, taking the crystal with them. The town was left in ruins, its streets stained with blood and its people dead or scattered to the winds. And as the sun rose over the smoldering wreckage, the townspeople realized with a sense of dread that the monsters would always be there, waiting in the shadows, ready to strike again. The survivors who had managed to escape the destruction of the town wandered through the forest, seeking shelter and safety. But they soon realized that the monsters were everywhere, lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce. They formed small groups, banding together for protection and support. They scavenged for food and supplies, trying to eke out a living in a world that had been turned upside down by the monsters' rampage. But it wasn't long before they realized that they weren't alone in the forest. Other survivors had also managed to escape the town, and they too were struggling to survive in the face of the monsters' wrath. Together, they formed a community, building makeshift shelters and fortifications to protect themselves from the monsters that roamed the woods. They worked together, pooling their resources and skills to create a semblance of order in the chaos. But even with their combined strength, they knew that they were always just one misstep away from being torn apart by the monsters. And so they lived in constant fear, always looking over their shoulders, always listening for the telltale growls and snarls of the creatures that haunted their every waking moment. Years passed, and the survivors grew old and weary. They had managed to create a semblance of a life for themselves, but they knew that they would never truly be safe from the monsters that still lurked in the forest. And so they passed their knowledge down to the next generation, warning them of the dangers that lay beyond the safety of their fortified walls. They told them tales of the monsters that had destroyed their town, and of the bravery and sacrifice of those who had managed to survive. And the children listened, wide-eyed and fearful, knowing that the monsters were still out there, waiting in the shadows, ready to strike at any moment. For they had learned the most important lesson of all, that in a world filled with monsters, there was no such thing as safety or security, only the constant struggle for survival. But as the years went by, the community of survivors began to grow stronger and more resilient. They learned to adapt to the dangers of the forest, devising new strategies and weapons to fight back against the monsters. They discovered hidden caches of weapons and ammunition, and even managed to scavenge some of the old technology left behind by the civilization that had once controlled the monsters. Slowly but surely, they began to push back against the creatures that had once held them in thrall. They formed hunting parties, stalking the monsters through the forest and taking them down with a combination of cunning and brute force. And with each monster that fell, the survivors grew stronger, more confident, more determined to take back their world from the creatures that had stolen it from them. Years turned into decades, and the community of survivors grew and flourished. They rebuilt their town, fortified their walls, and created a thriving society in the midst of the wilderness. And while the monsters still lurked in the shadows, waiting to strike, the survivors knew that they had the strength and the will to fight back. For they had learned that in a world filled with monsters, the only true power was the power of the human spirit, the indomitable will to survive and thrive, no matter what horrors lay beyond the walls. But as the community of survivors grew stronger, they also grew more ambitious. They began to venture further and further into the forest, seeking out new resources and territories to conquer. And as they did so, they began to encroach on the monsters' territory, destroying their habitats and hunting their prey. The creatures, already weakened by years of warfare and hardship, found themselves pushed to the brink of extinction. But the survivors did not care. They were consumed by their own greed and ambition, blinded to the consequences of their actions. They saw only the spoils of victory, and were willing to do whatever it took to claim them. And so it was that the monsters, facing annihilation at the hands of the humans, turned to a desperate measure. They banded together, forming an alliance that transcended their individual species, and made a pact with the darkness itself. They summoned forth a being of unspeakable power, a creature of pure malice and malevolence, that had lain dormant for eons, waiting for a chance to break free of its chains. And when it emerged from its prison in the depths of the underworld, it brought with it a new horror, a terror beyond imagining. It was a monster unlike any other, a being that existed beyond the boundaries of space and time, a creature that could destroy entire worlds with a single thought. And it was angry. The survivors watched in horror as the new monster descended upon them, its wrath burning with an otherworldly intensity. It tore through their defenses like they were nothing, rending steel and stone apart with ease. The survivors fought back with all their might, but they were no match for the monster's unfathomable power. One by one, they fell, their bodies ripped apart by the monster's tendrils of darkness. The forest burned with an eerie green flame as the monster consumed everything in its path. The survivors who managed to escape fled back to their fortified town, barricading themselves behind their walls and praying for deliverance. But it was too late. The monster had already breached their defenses, its tendrils of darkness reaching out to grab anything that moved. The survivors fought back with all their might, but it was no use. The monster was too powerful, too malevolent, too consumed by its own hatred to be stopped. And so it consumed them all, tearing them apart and absorbing their life force into its own monstrous form. The town was reduced to a smoking ruin, the last vestiges of humanity snuffed out in an instant. And as the monster feasted on the remnants of the survivors, it cackled with glee, knowing that it had finally triumphed over its ancient enemies. The forest was now its domain, a kingdom of darkness and horror that would never be challenged again. But the monster's victory was short-lived, for it soon realized that it had consumed something far more powerful than it had anticipated, the very essence of human spirit that had allowed the survivors to endure against all odds. As the monster absorbed the last remnants of the survivors, it felt a strange sensation deep within its being, something that it had never experienced before. It was a feeling of hope, of courage, of resilience, of compassion, and of love. The monster recoiled in horror, for it knew that these were the very emotions that it had sought to extinguish. But now, they were a part of its being, and it could not escape them. As the monster tried to resist the surge of emotions, it began to change. Its form twisted and contorted, its tendrils of darkness retracting into its body, as a blinding light emerged from within. The forest shook as the monster underwent a metamorphosis, its monstrous form giving way to a being of pure light and energy. And as the light expanded, the forest was reborn, the darkness receding and giving way to a new dawn. The monster had been transformed into something new, something that embodied the very spirit of humanity, a being of compassion, courage, and love. It had become a protector, a guardian, and a friend to all those who lived within the forest. And so it was that the forest was reborn, its creatures and inhabitants living in harmony with the transformed monster. It had become a symbol of hope, a beacon of light in a world filled with darkness and horror. And as the years passed, the forest flourished, its inhabitants thriving under the watchful eye of the transformed monster. For in a world filled with monsters, it was the power of the human spirit that had ultimately triumphed, bringing light to even the darkest of places. However, as the transformed monster continued to watch over the forest, it began to notice a disturbing trend. The inhabitants of the forest, emboldened by the peace and safety that the transformed monster provided, began to venture further and further outside the forest, encroaching on human settlements and causing chaos and destruction. The transformed monster knew that it could not allow this to continue. And so it made a decision that would change everything. It left the forest, venturing out into the world of humans, determined to teach them the value of compassion, courage, and love, just as it had learned from the survivors of the forest. The transformed monster journeyed across the land, battling against monsters and human alike, bringing peace wherever it went. And as it did so, it inspired others to follow in its footsteps, to stand up against the darkness and to fight for what was right. And so, the transformed monster became a legend, a symbol of hope and inspiration to all those who knew of it. It had transcended its origins as a creature of darkness, becoming something greater, something more. And in the end, it proved that even the most monstrous of beings can find redemption, if only they are willing to embrace the power of the human spirit. In the year 2156, a team of scientists from the Chronotech Corporation had finally discovered the key to time travel. The team, led by renowned physicist Dr. Olivia Williams, had been working on the project for over a decade, and they had finally succeeded. Using a combination of quantum mechanics and advanced computer algorithms, the Chronotech team had developed a time machine that could transport people back to any point in Earth's history. However, the team knew that such a discovery was dangerous and that it could have dire consequences if it fell into the wrong hands. To ensure that the time machine would only be used for the betterment of humanity, the Chronotech team decided to test the machine themselves. They would travel back to the age of the dinosaurs, a time when the world was vastly different from the present day. The team, consisting of Dr. Williams, 2 other scientists, and a group of 5 volunteers, stepped into the time machine, and with a flash of light, they were transported back 65 million years. The team found themselves in a lush, tropical forest, surrounded by towering trees and the sounds of chirping insects. In the distance, they could see a herd of triceratops grazing on the foliage. The team was amazed, and they began to explore their surroundings. However, things quickly took a turn for the worse. The team had not accounted for the dangers of the prehistoric world, and soon they found themselves being hunted by a pack of velociraptors. The team was forced to run for their lives, trying to stay alive in a world where humans were not at the top of the food chain. Despite their scientific knowledge and advanced technology, the team was unprepared for the sheer brutality of the ancient world. They struggled to survive, battling the elements and the ferocious predators that roamed the land. Over time, their numbers dwindled, and they began to realize that they may never make it back home. As the team struggled to survive, they began to experience strange side effects from the time travel. Their bodies began to warp and change, adapting to the harsh conditions of the prehistoric world. They grew claws and sharp teeth, their senses becoming more acute. The team realized that they had become part of the ancient world, and they would never be able to return to their own time. In the end, the Chronotech team's experiment had backfired, and they had become the very thing they had set out to study. They had become part of the ancient world, and their fate was sealed. The team had learned a valuable lesson about the dangers of playing with time, but it was too late. They were trapped in a world of monsters and predators, and they would never return home. As the Chronotech team struggled to survive in the prehistoric world, they began to realize that something was not quite right. The side effects they were experiencing were not simply adaptations to the environment, they were mutating. The team's bodies were changing at an alarming rate, and they soon discovered that they were not the only ones. As they traveled further into the jungle, the team encountered other groups of travelers who had also been sent back in time. However, these groups were different. They were mutated beyond recognition. Some had grown wings, others had developed extra limbs, and still others had become grotesque, hybrid creatures with features of both humans and dinosaurs. The Chronotech team realized that their time machine was not working as intended. The machine was not simply sending people back in time, it was altering them on a genetic level. The team had unwittingly become part of a twisted experiment, one that was being conducted by an unknown force. As the team struggled to survive and unravel the mystery of their predicament, they discovered that they were being hunted by the very creatures they had become. The mutated travelers were no longer human, and they were driven by a primal instinct to hunt and kill. The Chronotech team realized that they were not the top of the food chain after all. In a desperate bid for survival, the team decided to destroy the time machine, hoping that it would undo the mutations and send them back to their own time. However, as they worked to dismantle the machine, they were attacked by the mutated travelers, and a fierce battle ensued. In the end, the Chronotech team emerged victorious, but at a cost. Dr. Williams, the team's leader, had been fatally wounded in the battle. As she lay dying, she whispered a warning to her surviving teammates. "The time machine was not our creation," she said weakly. "We were only the latest in a long line of experiments. The machine was designed to create new life forms, to test the boundaries of evolution. And now, we are part of that experiment." The surviving members of the team looked at each other in horror, realizing the truth of her words. They had unwittingly become part of a sinister scheme, one that had been going on for millions of years. As they huddled together, unsure of what to do next, they heard a low, rumbling growl. Looking up, they saw a massive, mutated T-Rex emerge from the jungle, its jaws dripping with saliva. The Chronotech team had escaped the prehistoric world, but they had not escaped the consequences of their actions. They were trapped in a never-ending cycle of experimentation, destined to be mutated and sent back in time again and again, forever hunted by the monsters they had become. The remaining members of the Chronotech team knew they had to act fast. They had to find a way to break the cycle and put an end to the experiments. They quickly gathered what they could salvage from the time machine and set out into the jungle. As they trekked through the dense foliage, they encountered more and more mutated creatures, each one more terrifying than the last. The team struggled to fight them off, and their numbers dwindled even further. After several days of wandering through the jungle, they stumbled upon a cave system that seemed to go on for miles. The team cautiously made their way inside, hoping to find a way out of this nightmare. As they descended deeper into the caves, they began to encounter strange, glowing crystals that seemed to pulse with energy. The crystals hummed with a strange, otherworldly power, and the team soon realized that they had stumbled upon the source of the time machine's abilities. They also discovered something else, the source of the experiments. A massive, ancient machine lay hidden deep in the heart of the cave system, humming with a strange, unearthly energy. The machine was not of this world, and it was clear that it had been designed to create new forms of life. The Chronotech team realized that they had to destroy the machine if they were ever to escape this never-ending cycle of experimentation. They gathered their remaining resources and set about sabotaging the machine. As they worked, they heard a roar from deep within the caves. They knew they were running out of time, the mutated creatures were closing in. With a final push, they managed to set off a massive explosion, destroying the machine and collapsing the caves. The Chronotech team emerged from the jungle battered and bruised, but alive. They had put an end to the experiments, but they knew that they could never fully escape the consequences of their actions. They had meddled with time, and they had paid the price. Years later, the surviving members of the Chronotech team would tell their story, warning others of the dangers of time travel. They would become cautionary tales, warning future generations of the perils of playing with the fabric of time itself. But for the team, it was too late. They were forever marked by their experience, destined to carry the weight of their actions for the rest of their lives. The surviving members of the Chronotech team struggled to readjust to their normal lives. The horrors they had experienced in the prehistoric world haunted them, and they were plagued by nightmares and flashbacks. They sought therapy and support from each other, but they knew that they could never truly escape the trauma. But then something strange began to happen. One by one, the surviving members of the team began to develop strange abilities. One could move objects with their mind, another could control fire, and yet another could shapeshift. They realized that the experiments had not been in vain, they had been imbued with extraordinary powers. The team struggled to understand their newfound abilities, but they soon realized that they had a responsibility to use them for good. They formed a group, calling themselves the Timekeepers, and set about using their powers to protect the world from harm. But as they fought to right wrongs and prevent disasters, they also found themselves drawn into a web of intrigue and conspiracy. They discovered that there were other time machines in existence, each one controlled by a different organization with their own agenda. The Timekeepers found themselves in a race against time to prevent these organizations from altering history to suit their own purposes. As the Timekeepers battled against these organizations, they also struggled to come to terms with their own powers. Some members of the team found their abilities difficult to control, and they worried about the consequences of their actions. They also knew that they could never fully escape the shadow of the experiments that had given them their powers. But despite the challenges they faced, the Timekeepers were determined to use their powers for good. They worked tirelessly to protect the world from threats both present and future, and their efforts did not go unnoticed. The Timekeepers became known as heroes, revered by many for their selfless actions. However, as the years passed, the team began to realize that their powers came with a price. The strain of using their abilities took a toll on their bodies and minds, and they began to age at an accelerated rate. They knew that they could not continue to fight forever, but they also knew that they could not simply retire and fade into obscurity. They had to find a way to pass on their legacy to a new generation. And so, the Timekeepers began to search for individuals who possessed the potential to inherit their powers. They scoured the world for those who had been touched by time, seeking out those who had been exposed to its mysteries in one way or another. They found soldiers who had fought in wars, scientists who had experimented with time dilation, and even a few survivors of the chronotech experiments. One by one, the Timekeepers trained their successors, passing on their knowledge and their powers. They knew that their time was running out, but they also knew that they had succeeded in their mission. They had created a new generation of heroes who would carry on their legacy and protect the world from harm. As the last of the original Timekeepers passed away, the new generation took up the mantle, using their powers to continue the fight. And though they faced new challenges and new enemies, they knew that they would always be part of a legacy that stretched back through time itself. The legacy of the Timekeepers, a group of individuals who had dared to travel back to the age of the dinosaurs and had emerged with powers beyond imagining. The new generation of Timekeepers faced a world that was more connected and more dangerous than ever before. They knew that they could not operate in isolation, and so they worked to build alliances with other groups and organizations that shared their values. Together, they fought against threats both new and old, using their powers to protect the world from harm. But as the Timekeepers worked to secure the future, they also knew that they had to confront the past. They knew that the chronotech experiments had been unethical and dangerous, and they were determined to make sure that such a thing would never happen again. The Timekeepers used their influence to push for greater transparency and accountability in scientific research, and they worked to expose the wrongdoings of chronotech and other organizations like it. They knew that they could never fully make up for the harm that had been done, but they hoped that their efforts would prevent similar tragedies from occurring in the future. As the years went on, the Timekeepers continued to evolve and adapt to the changing world. They worked to find new ways to use their powers for good, and they sought out new allies and partners to join them in the fight. And though they faced challenges and setbacks along the way, they never lost sight of the legacy that had been passed down to them. In the end, the Timekeepers knew that their true legacy would not be measured in the battles they had won or the enemies they had defeated. It would be measured in the lives they had saved and the world they had helped to build. And they knew that as long as there were threats to the safety and security of the world, there would always be a need for heroes like them. As the Timekeepers faced a new threat, one that was unlike anything they had ever encountered before, they knew that the fate of the world hung in the balance. They had fought against many enemies, but this one was different, more powerful, more cunning, and more determined than any they had faced before. The Timekeepers knew that they could not face this new enemy alone. They reached out to their allies and partners, calling upon all those who had ever stood with them in the fight for justice and freedom. Together, they formed a coalition, one that spanned the globe and included people from all walks of life. As the coalition prepared to face the enemy, the Timekeepers could feel the weight of history upon their shoulders. They knew that they were part of a legacy that stretched back through time, and they knew that the choices they made in the coming days would shape the future of the world. And so, with a mixture of hope and trepidation, the Timekeepers set out to confront their greatest challenge yet. They knew that the road ahead would be long and perilous, but they also knew that they had a duty to fight for the world they had sworn to protect. As the sun set on the eve of the battle, the Timekeepers looked out across the horizon, steeling themselves for what was to come. And as the first rays of dawn broke across the sky, they knew that their fate and the fate of the world rested in their hands. The end? Or is it just the beginning? Deep beneath the Earth's surface lies a vast network of caves that few have ever explored. The darkness and isolation of these subterranean caverns can be suffocating, and many who venture into their depths never return. One such group of cavers was a team of experienced spelunkers who set out to map an unexplored section of the cave system. They had all the necessary equipment, including headlamps, ropes, and climbing gear, and were confident in their abilities. As they descended deeper into the cave, the air grew colder and the silence more oppressive. The only sounds were the soft drips of water and the occasional rustling of their gear. They pressed on, following their maps and taking note of any interesting formations they came across. It was during a rest stop that they first noticed something was wrong. One of the team members, a man named Dave, began to act strangely. He grew increasingly agitated and paranoid, convinced that something was following them through the cave. His teammates tried to calm him down, but he only grew more frantic. As they continued on, the team started to hear strange noises echoing through the caverns. It sounded like something was moving in the shadows, just out of sight. They tried to ignore it and press on, but the noises grew louder and more persistent. Then, the unthinkable happened. One of the team members disappeared. They searched frantically, calling out his name, but he was nowhere to be found. As they continued on, they began to realize that they were being stalked by something in the darkness. The remaining team members huddled together, their flashlights and headlamps flickering in the inky blackness. They could hear the thing moving closer and closer, its breath hot and fetid on their necks. Suddenly, Dave snapped. He began to scream and run blindly through the cave, dragging the others along with him. They could hear the thing gaining on them, its claws scraping against the rock. They emerged from the cave, gasping for breath and covered in sweat. The last thing they saw before they ran for their lives was a pair of glowing red eyes staring out of the darkness. None of them ever returned to the cave, and to this day, no one knows what happened to the missing team member or what stalks the depths of that subterranean labyrinth. Rumors began to spread about the haunted cave, and people started to avoid it at all costs. Some claimed to have seen strange lights flickering in the distance, while others reported hearing blood-curdling screams echoing from deep within the caverns. It wasn't until years later that a group of intrepid explorers, seeking to unravel the mystery of the haunted cave, decided to venture inside. They were a team of scientists, paranormal investigators, and thrill seekers, armed with the latest technology and equipment. As they descended into the cave, they found evidence of the previous team's presence. Gear and equipment were strewn about haphazardly, as if they had been abandoned in a hurry. The scientists collected samples of the cave's mineral formations and took readings of the air quality, but the paranormal investigators were more interested in the strange noises and unexplained phenomena they were experiencing. The team pressed on, determined to get to the bottom of the mystery. As they reached the deepest parts of the cave, they heard the same strange noises that had driven the previous team to madness. But this time, they were ready. They had cameras, sensors, and recording equipment, all designed to capture evidence of the paranormal. As they turned a corner, they came face to face with the source of the noise, a creature unlike anything they had ever seen. It was humanoid in shape, but its skin was a sickly gray color, and its eyes glowed red in the darkness. Its claws were long and sharp, and its breath came in short, ragged gasps. The team froze in terror, unsure of what to do. But the creature didn't attack. Instead, it simply stared at them with a sense of malevolent curiosity. The paranormal investigators tried to communicate with it, but it seemed to be beyond their understanding. Eventually, the creature disappeared back into the darkness, leaving the team shaken but determined to uncover the truth. They analyzed their footage and recordings, but they found nothing conclusive. The cave remained a mystery, and the creature that stalked its depths remained a source of fear and fascination for generations to come. Years passed, and the story of the haunted cave and the creature that lurked within became the stuff of legend. Many tried to unravel its mysteries, but none were successful. One day, a young scientist named Alice came across the legend and decided to investigate it. She was fascinated by the stories and wanted to see if there was any scientific explanation for the supposed paranormal activity. Alice gathered a team of experts and ventured into the cave, determined to uncover the truth. They encountered strange noises and unexplained phenomena, but Alice believed there was a rational explanation for everything. As they descended deeper into the cave, they found something unexpected, a small underground lake. The water was crystal clear, and there were no signs of life in it. Alice was excited by the discovery and began taking samples, studying the water's composition and its effect on the cave's ecosystem. But as she worked, Alice began to notice something strange. The water seemed to be moving, almost as if something was swimming beneath the surface. She looked closer and saw something that made her blood run cold, a pair of glowing red eyes staring back at her. Suddenly, the creature burst out of the water, revealing itself in all its monstrous glory. But instead of attacking, it simply stood there, staring at Alice with an almost curious expression. Alice's team was terrified, but she remained calm. She realized that the creature was not a monster, but something else entirely, an undiscovered species that had evolved in the depths of the cave, adapting to its harsh and isolated environment. As Alice studied the creature, she realized that it had intelligence far beyond what she had expected. It seemed to be studying her as well, its glowing red eyes filled with a sense of curiosity and wonder. Alice knew that the discovery of such a creature would be a scientific breakthrough of unparalleled proportions. She convinced her team to capture the creature and bring it back to the surface for study, despite their concerns about its potential danger. As they worked to subdue the creature, Alice began to feel a sense of unease. She realized that they were treating it like a specimen, a thing to be studied and dissected. She wondered if they were making a mistake in trying to bring it back to the surface, away from its natural habitat. Her concerns were brushed aside, and they managed to capture the creature and bring it back to the surface. But as they studied it in their labs, Alice's worst fears were realized. The creature was not adapting well to its new environment, and its health began to deteriorate rapidly. Alice realized that they had made a grave mistake in trying to capture the creature. It was never meant to be studied or dissected. It was a living being with thoughts, feelings, and a home deep within the cave. As the creature took its final breaths, Alice knew that she had to make things right. She convinced her team to return the creature to the cave, where it belonged. They released it back into the water, and as it swam away, Alice knew that she had learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes, the things we fear are not monsters at all, but wonders waiting to be discovered. And in our quest to uncover the truth, we must always remember to respect the mysteries of the natural world, and the creatures that call it home. As Alice and her team watched the creature swim away, a sense of relief washed over them. They had made the right decision, and the creature would now be able to live out the rest of its days in its natural habitat. But as they turned to leave the cave, they heard a strange noise coming from the darkness behind them. It sounded like a low growl, and it was growing louder by the second. Suddenly, the creature burst out of the water again, its eyes glowing with rage. It had not taken kindly to being captured and returned to its home, and now it was seeking revenge. Alice and her team ran for their lives, their footsteps echoing through the caverns as they fled from the creature's wrath. They could hear it pursuing them, its claws scraping against the rocks as it closed in for the kill. Just when they thought they were cornered, they saw a faint light in the distance. It was the entrance to the cave, and the team ran towards it as fast as they could. They burst out into the daylight, gasping for air, and turned to see the creature looming behind them. But as it stepped out into the light, something strange happened. Its skin began to shimmer, and its eyes lost their malevolent glow. Alice realized that the creature was not seeking revenge after all, it was simply protecting its home. The team watched in amazement as the creature disappeared back into the darkness of the cave, leaving them with a newfound respect for the mysteries of the natural world. As they made their way back to civilization, Alice knew that she had been changed by the experience. She had learned that sometimes, the greatest mysteries of the world cannot be explained by science alone. And sometimes, the things we fear the most are not monsters, but simply misunderstood wonders waiting to be discovered. Alice spent years studying the creature and its habitat, dedicating her life to understanding the mysteries of the natural world. She became an advocate for the protection of undiscovered species and the preservation of their natural habitats. Years later, as she looked back on her experience in the cave, Alice realized that the creature had given her a gift. It had shown her that there was still so much to be learned about the world around her, and that the most valuable discoveries were often the ones that challenged her understanding of the world. She had also learned that there was a balance to be struck between scientific discovery and the preservation of the natural world. It was not enough to simply study and understand the creatures and habitats that we encountered, we had a responsibility to protect them as well. Alice's work became renowned in the scientific community, and she became known as a pioneer in the field of environmental preservation. She continued to study undiscovered species and their habitats, always seeking to deepen her understanding of the world around her. And though she never forgot the terror she had felt in the cave that day, she also never forgot the wonder and awe that had accompanied it. For Alice, the experience had been a reminder that there was always more to be discovered, and that the natural world was a source of endless fascination and mystery. Years after her experience in the cave, Alice received a letter from a young woman who had read about her work in a scientific journal. The woman was a caver herself, and she had recently discovered a previously unknown network of caverns in a remote part of the world. Alice was intrigued by the woman's story, and she immediately began planning a trip to explore the new cave system. She assembled a team of experts in various scientific fields and set out for the remote region where the cave was located. As they made their way through the rugged terrain, Alice felt a sense of excitement and anticipation building within her. She knew that they were about to embark on a new and thrilling scientific discovery, one that would push the boundaries of human knowledge and understanding. When they finally arrived at the entrance to the cave, Alice felt a sense of awe wash over her. The cave was unlike anything she had ever seen before, a labyrinthine network of tunnels and caverns, filled with strange and wondrous creatures. As Alice and her team explored the cave, they discovered dozens of new species, each one more fascinating than the last. They documented their findings meticulously, recording every detail about the creatures and their habitats. But as they delved deeper into the cave system, Alice began to notice something strange. The creatures they encountered were not simply adapting to their environment, they were evolving at an alarming rate. As Alice studied the creatures, she realized that they were undergoing a process of rapid mutation, their genes shifting and adapting in response to the harsh and isolated environment of the cave. She knew that this was a discovery of unparalleled significance, one that could change the way we understand the process of evolution itself. But as they continued to explore the cave, Alice began to realize that their presence was having a profound impact on the creatures they were studying. The light from their lamps was altering the creatures' behavior, causing them to move away from the light and deeper into the cave. Alice knew that they had to act quickly if they were to prevent irreparable harm to the creatures and their habitat. She made the difficult decision to abandon their mission and leave the cave, but not before documenting every detail of their findings and making plans to return at a later date. As Alice and her team emerged from the cave, she felt a sense of disappointment and regret. She knew that they had uncovered something truly extraordinary, but she also knew that they had a responsibility to protect the creatures and their habitat from the impact of human interference. Years later, as she looked back on her experience in the cave, Alice realized that it had been a turning point in her life. She had learned that scientific discovery must always be balanced with a deep respect for the natural world, and that the mysteries of the universe were not there simply to be uncovered, but also to be preserved and protected for future generations. As Alice and her team emerged from the cave, they were met with an unexpected sight. A group of armed men in military gear had set up a perimeter around the entrance to the cave, and they were blocking their way out. Alice and her team were shocked and confused by the sudden appearance of the military, and they demanded to know what was going on. But the soldiers remained tight-lipped, and they refused to let the scientists leave the cave. As the hours passed, Alice began to fear that they had stumbled upon something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. She knew that their discovery could have far-reaching implications, and that there were people who would go to great lengths to prevent the truth from getting out. As night fell and the tension mounted, Alice and her team huddled together in the darkness, unsure of what the future would hold. They knew that they were in grave danger, and that their lives would never be the same again. And as Alice looked out into the darkness beyond the cave, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. There was a sense of foreboding in the air, as if something sinister was lurking just beyond their reach. With the military closing in and an unknown threat looming in the shadows, Alice and her team were left with one burning question: what had they uncovered in that cave that was worth killing for? Once there was a man named John who lived a life filled with sin and wickedness. He was selfish, cruel, and didn't care about anyone but himself. One day, he died in a car accident, and his soul was sent straight to hell. As soon as John arrived in hell, he felt the unbearable heat and saw the flames of fire all around him. He was terrified and begged for mercy, but there was none to be found in this place. As he wandered through the fiery landscape, he heard the sound of cannibals chanting and devouring human flesh. The sound sent shivers down John's spine, and he realized he was not alone. He turned around and saw a group of cannibals approaching him, their eyes filled with hunger and malice. They started to chase him, and he ran as fast as he could, but they were faster and caught up with him. John tried to fight them off, but there were too many of them, and he soon found himself overpowered. They tied him up and carried him to their camp, where they started to prepare him for dinner. They cut off his limbs one by one and roasted them over the fire, while John screamed in agony. The cannibals continued to feast on John's flesh, and he realized that this was his eternal punishment for his sins. He begged for forgiveness, but it was too late. The cannibals devoured every last inch of his body until there was nothing left but bones. John's screams echoed through hell, and the cannibals continued to feast on the souls of sinners like him for all eternity. It was a fate worse than death, and one that John could never escape. As the cannibals finished devouring John's body, they discarded his remains into a pile of bones. However, something strange began to happen. John's soul remained in hell, and he felt a burning desire to seek revenge on those who had eaten him. Desperate to escape his gruesome fate, John devised a plan. He waited until the cannibals were asleep and crept towards their camp. He used his newfound powers as a spirit to possess the body of one of the cannibals. Using his host's skills, John began to skin the bodies of other sinners who had been sent to hell. He sewed the skins together to create a grotesque suit, which he wore as a disguise to blend in with the cannibals. The cannibals never suspected that their prey had returned in a different form, and John began to plot his revenge. He waited for the right moment, and when the cannibals were least expecting it, he struck. John slaughtered the cannibals one by one, his fury and desire for revenge giving him the strength he needed to overpower them. He tore them apart with his bare hands and devoured their flesh, his hatred growing stronger with each passing moment. As he basked in the bloody aftermath of his vengeance, John realized that he had become something far worse than the cannibals he had killed. He had become a monster, consumed by his own anger and hatred. But it was too late to turn back. John had made his choice, and he would continue to roam the fiery landscape of hell, seeking out sinners to devour and adding to his human skin suit. His once human soul had been consumed by darkness, and there was no going back. As John wandered the fiery landscape of hell, his human skin suit began to decay and lose its effectiveness. He needed a new form of protection, and that's when he had a twisted idea. He remembered the pile of bones where his own remains had been discarded, and he realized that he could fashion them into a suit of armor. Using his powers as a spirit, John began to manipulate the bones and shape them into a crude suit of armor. The process was painful and gruesome, but John was consumed by his desire for power and revenge. He worked tirelessly, collecting bones from other sinners who had been discarded in the pile, and using them to reinforce his armor. With his new bone armor, John became even more fearsome than before. He was invulnerable to the attacks of other creatures in hell, and his strength was unmatched. He continued to roam the landscape, seeking out sinners to devour and adding to his armor as he went. But as time passed, John realized that he was no longer human. His body had become twisted and contorted, his once human soul consumed by darkness. He had become a monster, feared and reviled by all who encountered him. And so, John continued to wander the fiery landscape of hell, his armor clattering as he walked, a constant reminder of the gruesome fate that awaited all who dared to sin. He was a symbol of the consequences of wickedness, and a warning to all who entered this eternal damnation. As John wandered the fiery landscape of hell, his human skin suit began to decay and lose its effectiveness. He needed a new form of protection, and that's when he had a twisted idea. He remembered the pile of bones where his own remains had been discarded, and he realized that he could fashion them into a suit of armor. Using his powers as a spirit, John began to manipulate the bones and shape them into a crude suit of armor. The process was painful and gruesome, but John was consumed by his desire for power and revenge. He worked tirelessly, collecting bones from other sinners who had been discarded in the pile, and using them to reinforce his armor. With his new bone armor, John became even more fearsome than before. He was invulnerable to the attacks of other creatures in hell, and his strength was unmatched. He continued to roam the landscape, seeking out sinners to devour and adding to his armor as he went. But as time passed, John realized that he was no longer human. His body had become twisted and contorted, his once human soul consumed by darkness. He had become a monster, feared and reviled by all who encountered him. And so, John continued to wander the fiery landscape of hell, his armor clattering as he walked, a constant reminder of the gruesome fate that awaited all who dared to sin. He was a symbol of the consequences of wickedness, and a warning to all who entered this eternal damnation. As John stood there, soulless and vulnerable, the demons seized the opportunity to attack him. They tore into his flesh with claws and fangs, delighting in the sight of his agony. But even as he suffered, John felt a strange sense of liberation. For the first time in a long while, he was free from the darkness that had consumed him. He was no longer driven by a burning desire for revenge, or consumed by a thirst for power. He was simply himself, and in that moment, it was enough. As the demons devoured what remained of his physical form, John's soul was released from its prison. It floated upwards, towards the light that shone in the distance. For a moment, he hesitated, wondering if he deserved to be forgiven for all the atrocities he had committed in his time in hell. But as he drew closer to the light, he felt a sense of peace and acceptance wash over him. He realized that he had been given a second chance, and he vowed to make the most of it. As his soul was welcomed into the embrace of the afterlife, John knew that he had finally found redemption. Though he would never forget the horrors he had witnessed in hell, he could finally move past them, and begin the journey towards a new life, free from the darkness that had once consumed him. As John's soul continued towards the light, he felt a sense of weightlessness and serenity wash over him. He had never felt such a profound sense of peace before, and it filled him with hope and joy. As he approached the light, he realized that he was not alone. A figure was waiting for him, bathed in the gentle glow of the divine light. As John drew closer, he recognized the figure as an angel, radiant and beautiful beyond words. The angel smiled warmly at John, and welcomed him into the embrace of the divine. John felt a sense of awe and wonder wash over him, as he gazed upon the beauty and majesty of the divine realm. For what seemed like an eternity, John wandered the heavenly realms, basking in the warmth and love of the divine. He felt his soul begin to heal, as he shed the darkness and bitterness that had plagued him for so long. In time, John knew that he would be reborn, given a new life and a new chance to make the world a better place. But for now, he was content to simply bask in the radiance of the divine, and be at peace. And so John's soul remained in the divine realm, at peace and at rest, for all eternity. As John's soul basked in the radiance of the divine, he felt a sense of purpose and fulfillment begin to grow within him. He knew that he had been given a second chance for a reason, and that he had a duty to make the most of it. And so he began to explore the heavenly realms, seeking out others who had found redemption and peace. He listened to their stories, and shared his own, and together they found solace and comfort in each other's company. As time passed, John's soul began to transform. The darkness and bitterness that had once consumed him were replaced by a deep sense of compassion and empathy for others. He realized that his experiences in hell had given him a unique perspective on the nature of suffering and redemption, and he felt a calling to use that knowledge to help others find their own way towards the divine. And so John's soul became a guide and mentor to others, sharing his wisdom and compassion with those who needed it most. He journeyed across the heavenly realms, offering hope and healing to those who had been scarred by the trials of life. In time, John knew that he would be reborn into a new life, a life that would be marked by love and service to others. But for now, he was content to be a source of light and hope in the divine realm, a beacon of compassion and understanding for all who sought it. And so John's soul remained in the heavenly realms, at peace and at rest, for all eternity. As John's soul continued to grow and evolve in the divine realm, he began to feel a sense of restlessness. He knew that he had found peace and purpose in his new existence, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more he could do to help others. And then, one day, he heard a faint whisper in the back of his mind. It was a voice he recognized all too well, the voice of the darkness that had once consumed him. At first, John tried to ignore the voice, but it grew louder and more insistent with each passing day. It whispered to him of the suffering and pain that still existed in the mortal world, and urged him to use his newfound wisdom and compassion to help those who were still trapped in the darkness. As John listened to the voice, he realized that it was not a call to return to his old ways, but rather a call to bring the light of the divine into the world of mortals. And so he made a decision. He would willingly leave the heavenly realms, and return to the mortal world to serve as a guide and mentor to those who were still lost in the darkness. With a sense of purpose and determination, John's soul left the heavenly realms and descended back into the mortal world. He knew that the journey ahead would be difficult, and that there would be many challenges and obstacles to overcome, but he was ready to face them all. As he entered the mortal realm once again, John could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in on him. But he knew that he was not alone. The divine light still burned brightly within him, and he would use that light to guide him through the trials ahead. And so John began his new journey, a journey that would be marked by love, compassion, and a deep sense of purpose. He knew that it would not be easy, but he was ready to face whatever lay ahead, knowing that he had been given a second chance for a reason. As John walked through the mortal world, he saw the suffering and pain that still existed. But he also saw the glimmers of hope and light that shone through the darkness. And he knew that it was his duty to help those who were still lost in the shadows to find their way towards the light. He began by seeking out those who were most in need, the homeless, the sick, the lost and the forgotten. He listened to their stories, and shared his own, offering them comfort and hope in their darkest moments. Over time, word of John's kindness and compassion began to spread, and people from all walks of life began to seek him out. They came to him with their problems and their pain, and he listened to them all, offering guidance and support with a gentle and loving hand. And in time, John's work began to bear fruit. The people he had helped began to find their way towards the light, shedding the darkness and bitterness that had once consumed them. And as they did, they began to spread the light to others, creating a chain reaction of healing and redemption that spread throughout the world. As the years passed, John's work continued. He never lost sight of his purpose, and he remained true to the light that had guided him through the darkest moments of his existence. And though he faced many challenges and setbacks along the way, he never wavered, knowing that he had been given a second chance for a reason. And so John's soul continued to shine brightly, a beacon of hope and compassion for all who sought it. And though he would eventually pass on from this mortal world, his legacy would live on, a testament to the power of redemption and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Just as John's soul continued to shine brightly, a dark shadow began to creep into the world. It was a shadow that John had not seen before, one that was darker and more malevolent than anything he had ever encountered. As he looked out into the world, John could see the shadow growing, spreading its tendrils into the hearts and minds of those around him. And he knew that he had to act fast, before it was too late. With a sense of urgency and determination, John set out to confront the darkness, knowing that the fate of the world hung in the balance. And as he faced down the shadow, he knew that this would be his greatest challenge yet, one that would test him to the very limits of his soul. But what happened next, no one knows for sure. Some say that John was able to vanquish the darkness, saving the world from its malevolent grip. Others say that he was consumed by the darkness, his soul falling back into the shadows from which it had once emerged. And so the fate of John's soul remains a mystery, a tale told in hushed whispers around campfires and in the darkest corners of the world. But one thing is certain, his legacy lives on, a reminder of the enduring power of love, compassion, and redemption in a world that is all too often consumed by darkness. As the sun began to set over the Pacific Ocean, the small plane carrying 3 passengers descended rapidly towards a deserted island. The turbulence had grown increasingly worse over the past few minutes, and the pilot's attempts to steady the aircraft seemed futile. Suddenly, with a jolt that shook the entire plane, they crashed into the island's thick forest. The 3 passengers, a young couple named Samantha and Mark, and an elderly man named John, stumbled out of the wreckage, disoriented and shaken. They quickly realized that they were stranded on an unknown island, with no means of communication with the outside world. The plane was in ruins, and their supplies were limited to a few bottles of water and a handful of snacks. As they wandered through the dense jungle, they began to feel a sense of unease. Strange sounds echoed through the trees, and the rustling of leaves made them jump at every turn. They soon came across an abandoned village, with ancient ruins and overgrown paths leading in every direction. It was as if the island had been untouched for centuries. As they explored the ruins, they discovered a set of strange symbols etched into the rocks. The symbols seemed to spell out a warning, but they could not decipher their meaning. Suddenly, Samantha let out a piercing scream as she saw a shadowy figure lurking in the distance. They quickly retreated to a nearby cave, hoping to find safety within its walls. As they huddled together in the darkness, they could hear the footsteps of something approaching. The sound grew louder and louder until it was right outside the cave. Suddenly, a grotesque creature with glowing eyes emerged from the shadows, revealing its sharp teeth and twisted limbs. The 3 travelers froze in terror as the creature attacked. As the creature drew closer, John used his cane to fend it off, while Mark and Samantha searched frantically for a way to escape. Just as the creature was about to strike, they stumbled upon a hidden passage leading to an underground cavern. They quickly made their way through the narrow tunnels, hoping to find a way off the island. As they emerged from the tunnels, they found themselves face to face with a massive temple, guarded by a group of sinister figures. They realized that they had stumbled upon an ancient civilization that had been long forgotten by the outside world. They had trespassed into a forbidden realm, and there was no telling what horrors awaited them. The 3 travelers knew that they had to find a way off the island before it was too late. They braced themselves for the journey ahead, knowing that they would have to face their greatest fears to survive. As they ventured deeper into the temple, they were consumed by the darkness, their screams echoing through the corridors as they were swallowed up by the island's mysteries. As the 3 travelers stumbled through the temple's dark and foreboding corridors, they could feel their fear and desperation growing with every step. They knew that they had to find a way off the island before it was too late, but it seemed as if every path they took only led them deeper into the unknown. Suddenly, they heard a voice calling out to them from the darkness. It was a woman's voice, soft and melodic, but filled with an otherworldly quality that made their hair stand on end. The voice beckoned to them, promising them a way out of the temple and off the island. At first, the travelers were hesitant to follow the voice, but their fear and desperation got the better of them. They began to follow the voice, drawn deeper into the temple's labyrinthine corridors. As they walked, they could feel the presence of something watching them, something that seemed to be guiding their every step. Finally, they emerged into a large chamber, where they found themselves face to face with the source of the voice. It was a woman, clad in a flowing white robe, with long black hair that flowed down her back like a river. She was beautiful and ethereal, with a haunting quality that made the travelers feel both drawn to her and afraid. The woman told them that she was the guardian of the island, the one who watched over its secrets and kept its mysteries hidden from the world. She promised to help them leave the island, but in exchange, she demanded that they leave something behind, something of great value and significance. At first, the travelers were reluctant to make the deal, but the woman's persuasive voice and otherworldly aura convinced them otherwise. They decided to leave behind their precious family heirloom, a ring that had been passed down through generations of their family. As they handed over the ring, the woman smiled, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. She told them that they were free to leave the island and go back to their lives, but warned them that they would always be bound to the island, that a piece of them would always remain there. The travelers left the island, their memories filled with the haunting images of their time there. As they settled back into their lives, they realized that something was different. They could feel a piece of the island within them, a part of their souls that would never be able to leave the island behind. They were forever bound to its mysteries, forever haunted by its secrets. As time went on, the travelers tried their best to move on from their experience on the island. But the memory of the woman and her haunting voice never left them, and they found themselves haunted by nightmares of the island and the secrets it held. Years went by, and the travelers grew old. But even in their old age, they could still feel the pull of the island, calling out to them in their dreams. They knew that they had to return, that they had to confront the mysteries that had haunted them for so long. So they set out once again, this time determined to uncover the secrets of the island and the woman who had claimed it as her own. They returned to the island, determined to find the woman and demand answers. As they made their way through the temple's dark corridors, they could feel the weight of their age and their past experiences bearing down on them. But they persevered, driven by a desire to uncover the truth. Finally, they came to the chamber where they had first met the woman all those years ago. But when they entered, they found that the woman was no longer there. In her place stood a mirror, reflecting back their own aged faces. As they looked into the mirror, they realized that the woman had never been real, that she had been a manifestation of their own fears and desires. The island had been a test, a trial meant to challenge them and force them to confront the darkest parts of themselves. In the end, the travelers realized that the island and its mysteries had always been a part of them. They had carried it with them all along, and they had never truly left it behind. But instead of fearing it, they embraced it, knowing that it was a part of who they were. And as they left the island for the final time, they knew that they had finally come to terms with their past. They had faced their fears, uncovered the truth, and found peace in the knowledge that they had conquered the island and the darkness it held within. As the travelers left the island for the last time, they felt a sense of closure and relief wash over them. They had faced their demons, and emerged stronger for it. But as they sailed away from the island, they noticed something strange in the distance. The sky had darkened, and a storm was brewing on the horizon. As they looked closer, they saw that the storm was centered directly over the island they had just left. The travelers watched in horror as lightning struck the island, and a bright burst of light illuminated the sky. When the light faded, the island was gone, vanished without a trace. The travelers were stunned, unable to comprehend what had just happened. They had faced the island's challenges and uncovered its secrets, but now it seemed as if the island had vanished from existence. As they sailed away, the travelers realized that the island had never truly been a physical place, it had been a manifestation of their own fears and desires. And now that they had faced those fears and come to terms with their past, the island had served its purpose and vanished from existence. The travelers knew that they would never forget their time on the island, and the lessons they had learned there. They would carry the memory of the island with them always, a reminder of the power of the human mind and the mysteries of the universe. And as they sailed away into the horizon, they felt a sense of peace and contentment, knowing that they had faced their fears, conquered their demons, and emerged stronger for it. As the travelers left the island for the last time, they felt a sense of closure and relief wash over them. They had faced their demons, and emerged stronger for it. But as they sailed away from the island, they noticed something strange in the distance. The sky had darkened, and a storm was brewing on the horizon. As they looked closer, they saw that the storm was centered directly over the island they had just left. The travelers watched in horror as lightning struck the island, and a bright burst of light illuminated the sky. When the light faded, the island was gone, vanished without a trace. The travelers were stunned, unable to comprehend what had just happened. They had faced the island's challenges and uncovered its secrets, but now it seemed as if the island had vanished from existence. As they sailed away, the travelers realized that the island had never truly been a physical place, it had been a manifestation of their own fears and desires. And now that they had faced those fears and come to terms with their past, the island had served its purpose and vanished from existence. The travelers knew that they would never forget their time on the island, and the lessons they had learned there. They would carry the memory of the island with them always, a reminder of the power of the human mind and the mysteries of the universe. And as they sailed away into the horizon, they felt a sense of peace and contentment, knowing that they had faced their fears, conquered their demons, and emerged stronger for it. The travelers' discovery of the island's true nature shook them to the core. They had believed they had been on a physical island, facing tangible challenges, but in reality, they had been in a controlled environment, with every move they made being monitored and evaluated. The knowledge that their experiences had been artificially constructed left them feeling violated and betrayed. They struggled to come to terms with the fact that their lives had been used as a tool for experimentation without their knowledge or consent. But as time passed, the travelers began to see the positive impact the experience had on them. They realized that the challenges they faced on the island had forced them to confront their fears and vulnerabilities in ways they never would have otherwise. The travelers formed a support group, bonding over their shared experiences on the island. They found comfort in each other's company, knowing that they had been through something unique and profound. Together, they began to campaign for greater transparency and accountability in government research, hoping to prevent others from being subjected to the same kind of experimentation they had faced. As the years passed, the travelers continued to keep the memory of the island alive. They spoke openly about their experiences, sharing their story with others in the hope of raising awareness about the dangers of unchecked experimentation. And as they reflected on their journey, they knew that they had come out stronger for it. They had faced their fears, uncovered the truth, and used their experiences to make a difference in the world. The travelers realized that the island had been more than just a horror story. It had been a catalyst for change, a force that had pushed them to confront the darkest parts of themselves and emerge stronger for it. Years passed, and the travelers went their separate ways, but they remained connected by the bond they had formed on the island. They continued to meet regularly and share their experiences, offering each other support and guidance. As they got older, they realized that the island had given them a gift, the gift of perspective. They had come face to face with their deepest fears and vulnerabilities, and in doing so, they had gained a greater appreciation for the preciousness of life. The travelers made a pact to live each day to the fullest, to embrace every opportunity and challenge that came their way. They knew that life was fleeting and fragile, and they refused to waste a single moment. And so they lived, each in their own way, but with a shared determination to make the most of their time on Earth. They traveled the world, pursued their passions, and gave back to their communities in meaningful ways. As they approached the end of their lives, the travelers looked back on their journey and smiled. They knew that the island had been a defining moment in their lives, a turning point that had set them on a path of self-discovery and growth. And as they took their final breaths, surrounded by loved ones, the travelers knew that the island would live on, not as a place of horror, but as a symbol of the power of the human spirit, and the resilience of the human soul. In the end, the traveler's story became the stuff of legend, whispered in hushed tones by those who dared to venture into the unknown. The island remained shrouded in mystery, a place of wonder and terror that continued to draw adventurers from all over the world. But the travelers knew the truth, and they carried it with them to their graves. They had been tested and challenged in ways they could never have imagined, but they had emerged stronger for it. Their legacy lived on, not just in the stories they had shared, but in the impact they had made on the world. The travelers had used their experiences to drive change, to make the world a better place, and in doing so, they had left their mark on the world. And so, the traveler's story came full circle, from a horror story to a tale of courage and resilience, a reminder of the power of the human spirit to overcome even the darkest of challenges. For those who dared to venture into the unknown, the island remained a place of mystery and terror. But for the travelers, it had become something more, a symbol of hope, of the human capacity to overcome even the most impossible odds. And as their story continued to be told and retold, the travelers' legacy lived on, inspiring new generations to face their fears, to seek out the unknown, and to never give up on the journey towards self-discovery and growth. As the travelers' legacy continued to be told and retold, a small group of adventurers set out to find the island that had changed their lives forever. Despite the warnings of those who had come before them, they were determined to uncover the truth for themselves, to experience the same challenges and revelations that had transformed the lives of the travelers. But when they arrived on the island, they found something unexpected, a note left behind by the travelers, warning them of the dangers that lay ahead. The note read, "Beware the island. It is not what it seems. It will test you in ways you cannot imagine. But if you are brave enough to face it, you will emerge stronger for it." The adventurers were taken aback. They had expected to find a place of horror, a place of darkness and fear. But instead, they found a message of hope, of resilience, and of determination. And as they continued their journey, they realized that the island was not just a physical place, but a state of mind, a place where the impossible could be overcome, where the darkest of fears could be confronted, and where the human spirit could be transformed. And so, the travelers' legacy lived on, not just in their story, but in the hearts and minds of those who dared to venture into the unknown, who were brave enough to face their fears and emerge stronger for it. For in the end, the island was not a place of horror, but a place of transformation, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope, always a way forward, always a chance for a new beginning. On a cold winter's night in 2016, a small town in the Midwestern United States was shocked by a horrific crime that occurred in one of its quiet residential neighborhoods. The victim was a 33-year-old woman named Amanda, who lived alone in a small house on the corner of the street. Amanda was a beloved member of the community, known for her kind heart and gentle nature. She worked as a nurse at the local hospital and was always willing to lend a helping hand to anyone in need. On the night of the crime, Amanda was at home watching TV when someone knocked on her door. She opened the door to find a man standing on her doorstep, claiming to be in need of medical assistance. As a nurse, Amanda didn't hesitate to offer her help and invited the man into her home. Once inside, the man attacked Amanda, brutally beating her and leaving her unconscious on the floor. He then proceeded to ransack the house, stealing anything of value before fleeing the scene. A neighbor who heard the commotion called the police, and Amanda was rushed to the hospital, where she underwent emergency surgery for her injuries. However, despite the best efforts of the medical staff, Amanda passed away the following day due to severe head trauma. The police launched an intensive investigation, combing through the crime scene for any evidence that could lead them to the perpetrator. They were able to obtain DNA samples from the scene, which they later matched to a man who had been arrested for a similar crime in a nearby town. The man was eventually brought to trial, where he was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The community was left reeling from the tragic loss of Amanda, but found some solace in the fact that justice had been served. The trial of Amanda's killer revealed shocking details about the man's past, including a long history of violent crimes and a pattern of preying on vulnerable women. It was discovered that the man had been released from prison just months before Amanda's murder, after serving a sentence for assault and battery. Despite concerns from law enforcement officials and advocates for victims' rights, he was released back into society without any formal rehabilitation or monitoring. The case prompted calls for reform in the criminal justice system, with many arguing that more needs to be done to protect communities from dangerous offenders. Amanda's family and friends also became vocal advocates for victims' rights, calling for increased support and resources for those who have suffered at the hands of violent criminals. In the years since Amanda's death, the community has rallied around her memory, holding vigils and fundraisers in her honor. Her legacy lives on through the work of local organizations that support victims of crime and advocate for safer communities. Although Amanda's life was cut tragically short, her story serves as a reminder of the importance of standing up for justice and working together to create a better world. In the aftermath of Amanda's murder, her family and friends also sought to honor her memory by creating a scholarship in her name. The scholarship is awarded annually to a nursing student who embodies Amanda's compassionate and caring spirit, and who is committed to making a positive difference in the lives of others. Through the scholarship, Amanda's legacy continues to inspire a new generation of healthcare professionals, who are dedicated to upholding the values that she held dear. The case also had a profound impact on law enforcement officials, who recognized the need for better coordination and communication between agencies to prevent violent offenders from slipping through the cracks of the criminal justice system. In response to the case, new protocols were established for sharing information between law enforcement agencies, and efforts were made to increase resources for rehabilitation and treatment programs that could help offenders turn their lives around. While nothing can bring back Amanda or undo the pain and suffering that her loved ones have endured, her tragic story has spurred positive change in the community and in the criminal justice system as a whole. Through the collective efforts of law enforcement officials, community leaders, and advocates for victims' rights, Amanda's memory will continue to inspire hope, healing, and progress for years to come. In the years following the trial and sentencing of Amanda's killer, her family and friends continued to work tirelessly to raise awareness about the importance of victims' rights and the need for greater accountability in the criminal justice system. They organized rallies, fundraisers, and awareness campaigns, which helped to bring attention to the issues at the heart of Amanda's case and to mobilize support for reform efforts. Their efforts paid off, as lawmakers and community leaders began to take notice and to take action. New legislation was introduced to strengthen victims' rights, increase funding for victim support services, and improve collaboration between law enforcement agencies. At the same time, the community rallied around Amanda's family, offering them support and comfort in their time of grief. They held memorials and candlelight vigils, and reached out to the family to offer whatever help they could. Through it all, Amanda's memory remained a beacon of hope and inspiration for those who knew her and for those who continue to work towards a better, safer, and more just society. While the pain of her loss will never fully fade, the legacy that she leaves behind serves as a powerful reminder of the impact that even one person can have on the world, and of the importance of fighting for what is right and just. In the years that followed Amanda's murder, her family and friends continued to honor her memory through their advocacy work and the annual awarding of the nursing scholarship in her name. The scholarship helped to support the next generation of healthcare professionals, who were inspired by Amanda's dedication to compassionate care and committed to making a difference in their communities. As the years passed, Amanda's case remained a cautionary tale of the dangers of releasing violent offenders back into society without proper rehabilitation and monitoring. Her story also continued to highlight the importance of community support for victims of crime and their families. Through their ongoing efforts, Amanda's loved ones ensured that her legacy would live on, inspiring others to work towards a brighter and more just future. Despite the tragedy that took her life, Amanda's memory remains a powerful force for good in the world, a reminder of the resilience and strength of the human spirit, and a call to action for those who seek to make a positive impact in their communities. As the years passed and the memory of Amanda's tragic death began to fade, a dark twist emerged that shocked the community once again. It was discovered that Amanda's killer had a partner in crime, a co-conspirator who had helped him plan and carry out the brutal murder. The partner, who had never been caught or identified, had been living among the community all along, undetected. As the investigation into the co-conspirator's identity began, suspicions and accusations flew throughout the community. People who had once trusted one another began to turn on each other, as fear and suspicion swept through the town. The case consumed the community, and tensions continued to escalate as the investigation dragged on. Meanwhile, Amanda's family and friends were left to grapple with the realization that the case was far from over, and that there were still dangerous individuals out there who had yet to be brought to justice. As the hunt for the co-conspirator intensified, many residents began to fear for their safety, locking their doors and avoiding public places. Rumors and speculation ran rampant, and the sense of unease and mistrust continued to grow. Despite the best efforts of law enforcement officials, the co-conspirator remained at large, a shadowy figure lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike again. And as the years passed, the community remained on edge, knowing that they were never truly safe, and that the darkness that had consumed them after Amanda's death had never truly lifted. Despite the fear and uncertainty that continued to plague the community, law enforcement officials refused to give up on the case. They continued to pursue every lead and piece of evidence, determined to bring the co-conspirator to justice. Finally, after years of searching, a breakthrough was made. A witness came forward with crucial information that led investigators to the co-conspirator's doorstep. The arrest of the co-conspirator sent shockwaves through the community, as residents struggled to come to terms with the fact that one of their own had been involved in such a heinous crime. The trial was highly publicized, and emotions ran high as the details of Amanda's murder were rehashed in court. In the end, the co-conspirator was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. But the damage had already been done. The community had been shattered by the revelation that there was more than one killer involved in Amanda's death. And even as the co-conspirator was led away in handcuffs, the residents of the town knew that they would never be able to forget the horror that had consumed their community. In the end, the memory of Amanda's murder would forever be intertwined with the darkness that had consumed the community in the years that followed. And though justice had been served, the scars of that dark chapter in the town's history would never truly fade away. As the co-conspirator was led away to begin their sentence, the community breathed a collective sigh of relief. But the investigation into Amanda's murder had left deep scars that would never fully heal. Despite the closure of the trial, rumors persisted about other individuals who may have been involved in the crime. As the years passed, new evidence came to light that suggested that there may have been more to Amanda's murder than had been previously thought. But just as the case seemed to be on the brink of a major breakthrough, something unexpected happened. The evidence disappeared, and the trail went cold once again. Law enforcement officials were left scratching their heads, unsure of what had happened to the evidence and who might be responsible. And as the investigation once again ground to a halt, the community was left to wonder if they would ever know the full truth about what had happened to Amanda. The case had taken so many unexpected twists and turns, and it seemed as though there were still more secrets waiting to be uncovered. But with the evidence gone and no new leads to follow, the future of the investigation was uncertain. For Amanda's family and friends, the uncertainty was unbearable. They had spent so many years fighting for justice, and it seemed as though they were no closer to finding it than they had been on the day of Amanda's death. As the years passed, the case continued to haunt the community, and the memory of Amanda's murder lingered like a dark cloud over the town. And even as time passed, the possibility that the truth might one day be uncovered remained tantalizingly out of reach. Just when it seemed like the case would never be solved, a new lead emerged. A previously unknown witness had come forward with information that could potentially crack the case wide open. But this lead was different from the others. It was shaky and uncertain, and it came from an unlikely source. Despite the doubts and skepticism, the investigators decided to follow it, knowing that it might be their last chance to solve the case. As they delved deeper into the new lead, the investigators began to uncover a web of lies and deception that went far deeper than anyone had imagined. It became clear that Amanda's murder was just the tip of the iceberg, and that there were even more heinous crimes lurking beneath the surface. But just as the investigators were on the verge of uncovering the truth, something unthinkable happened. The witness who had provided the crucial information was found dead, the victim of an apparent suicide. The investigators were left reeling, unsure of what to do next. With their lead gone, it seemed as though the case would once again fall apart. But one investigator refused to give up. Despite the setback, he continued to pursue the case, driven by a fierce determination to uncover the truth. And as he delved deeper into the dark underworld of the town, he began to realize that the web of lies and deceit went far deeper than he had ever imagined. As the investigation approached its climax, the investigator found himself caught in a dangerous game of cat and mouse, hunted by unknown forces who would stop at nothing to keep their secrets hidden. And just as the investigator was on the verge of cracking the case wide open, he found himself face to face with the true mastermind behind the conspiracy, a shadowy figure who had been manipulating events from behind the scenes. With his life hanging in the balance, the investigator knew that he was about to uncover the truth behind Amanda's murder, and that the consequences of that truth would be far-reaching and deadly. As the investigator stood face to face with the shadowy figure, he felt a shiver run down his spine. He knew that he was in grave danger, but he also knew that he couldn't back down now. The two men stared at each other for a long moment, their eyes locked in a silent battle of wills. And then, without warning, the figure made his move. The investigator had no time to react. One moment he was standing there, staring at his adversary, and the next he was falling through the darkness, his world spinning out of control. He had no idea where he was or what had happened to him, but one thing was clear: he was in deep trouble. And as he struggled to make sense of his surroundings, he realized that the truth behind Amanda's murder was even darker and more sinister than he had ever imagined. But just as he was beginning to piece together the puzzle, the darkness closed in around him once again, and he was left alone with his thoughts, wondering if he would ever escape the clutches of the shadowy figure who held the key to the truth. The fate of the investigation hung in the balance, and the future of the town was at stake. But as the investigator struggled to stay alive, he knew that he was the only one who could uncover the truth behind the darkness that had consumed the community. And with that thought in his mind, he resolved to do whatever it took to survive and bring justice to the memory of Amanda, even if it meant sacrificing everything he held dear. On a chilly night in January 2018, the peaceful town of Millfield, Ohio was rocked by a brutal crime. The victim, 25-year-old Samantha Lewis, was found dead in her apartment by her roommate. The scene was a horrific one, with Lewis having suffered multiple stab wounds to her chest and neck. The police arrived at the scene and quickly secured the area. They interviewed Lewis' roommate and several of her friends, but none of them had any information that could help them solve the crime. They also reviewed surveillance footage from the building, but it didn't provide any clues either. The investigation continued for weeks, but the case went cold. That was until a neighbor reported seeing a suspicious-looking man in the building on the night of the murder. The man was described as being in his mid-30s with short hair and a scruffy beard. He was seen leaving the building shortly after the murder occurred. The police followed up on this lead and began investigating people who fit the description. After weeks of searching, they finally found a man who matched the description. His name was Jonathan Smith, and he had a history of violent crimes. The police brought Smith in for questioning, but he denied any involvement in the murder. However, they were able to obtain a search warrant for his apartment and found evidence that linked him to the crime. They found a blood-stained shirt and a knife with traces of Samantha Lewis blood on it. Smith was arrested and charged with the murder of Samantha Lewis. At his trial, the prosecution presented a compelling case, detailing the forensic evidence and witness testimonies that linked Smith to the crime. Smith's defense team tried to argue that the evidence was circumstantial and that there was no direct proof that he had killed Lewis. However, the jury wasn't convinced and found Smith guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The town of Millfield was left to pick up the pieces after the tragic event, but the resolution of the case brought some sense of closure to Samantha Lewis' family and friends. The memory of that cold January night would linger for years to come, a reminder that even the quietest of towns can be home to brutal crimes. Despite the conviction of Jonathan Smith, the community of Millfield remained on edge. They were shaken by the brutal nature of Samantha Lewis' murder and were fearful that there might be more killers lurking in their small town. The police tried to reassure the public that Smith acted alone, but the fear had already taken hold. People were more cautious when walking alone at night, and the local stores started to see an uptick in the sale of self-defense products like pepper spray and tasers. As time passed, the town slowly started to heal from the tragedy. However, rumors began to circulate that Smith was not the only one involved in the murder. Some believed that he had been part of a larger group of killers, and that there were still people out there who were responsible for Samantha Lewis' death. The police investigated these rumors, but they were unable to find any evidence to support them. They insisted that Smith acted alone, and that there was no reason to believe that anyone else was involved in the crime. Despite this, the rumors continued to spread, and some people in the community started to become obsessed with the case. They created online forums and chat groups dedicated to discussing the murder of Samantha Lewis, and they pored over every detail of the case, trying to find any clues that might have been missed. Years went by, and the town slowly started to forget about the murder of Samantha Lewis. It remained a tragic event in their history, but it no longer dominated their thoughts and fears. Then, in 2021, a new development in the case shocked the community once again. Jonathan Smith had been found dead in his prison cell, an apparent suicide. This news reignited the rumors that there had been more people involved in the murder, and it sparked a renewed interest in the case. The police launched a new investigation into the murder of Samantha Lewis, hoping to put the rumors to rest once and for all. They conducted interviews with people who had been close to Smith, hoping to uncover any information that might help them solve the case. Despite their efforts, the investigation turned up nothing new. The evidence still pointed to Smith as the sole killer, and there was no reason to believe that anyone else was involved in the crime. The community of Millfield was left with more questions than answers. The murder of Samantha Lewis remained a haunting mystery, one that had shaken their small town to its core and left them with a deep sense of unease. They could only hope that one day, the truth about what happened that cold January night would finally be revealed. The investigation into the murder of Samantha Lewis continued for months, with the police following up on every lead and tip that they received. Despite their best efforts, however, they were unable to find any new evidence that would shed light on the case. The town of Millfield remained on edge, with people still fearful that there might be more killers out there. Some residents started to take matters into their own hands, setting up neighborhood watch groups and organizing self-defense classes. Meanwhile, the media coverage of the case continued to grow. Journalists from around the country descended on Millfield, eager to uncover any new details about the murder of Samantha Lewis. They interviewed friends and family members, local law enforcement officials, and anyone else who might have information about the case. As the months went by, the coverage of the case started to die down. The media moved on to other stories, and the town of Millfield slowly returned to its normal routine. Then, in the summer of 2022, a new piece of evidence was discovered that would turn the case on its head. A group of hikers stumbled upon a backpack in a remote part of the nearby woods. Inside the backpack, they found a knife with blood on it, along with a note that read, "I killed Samantha Lewis." The hikers immediately contacted the police, who rushed to the scene. They took the backpack and its contents into evidence and began investigating who might have left it there. It didn't take long for them to track down the person responsible. It turned out to be a man who had been living in Millfield at the time of the murder but had since moved away. He had a history of mental illness and had been in and out of treatment centers for years. The man confessed to the murder of Samantha Lewis, explaining that he had become obsessed with her and had followed her home on the night of the murder. He claimed that he had no memory of actually killing her, but that he must have done it in a fit of delusion. The confession shocked the town of Millfield, who had been living with the fear of a killer on the loose for years. The news that the real killer had been found brought a sense of closure to the community, who could finally start to put the tragedy behind them. The man responsible for Samantha Lewis' murder was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. He was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The town of Millfield slowly started to heal from the trauma of the murder, knowing that justice had finally been served. They could now remember Samantha Lewis for who she was, a beloved member of their community whose life was tragically cut short. After the man's confession and subsequent arrest, the town of Millfield breathed a collective sigh of relief. But as the investigation delved deeper, a shocking twist was uncovered. It turned out that the man was not acting alone in the murder of Samantha Lewis. He had been coerced and manipulated by a group of individuals who had convinced him to carry out the killing. The group had been involved in a dangerous cult that was obsessed with death and murder. They had been conducting dark rituals in secret, and Samantha Lewis had unknowingly stumbled upon one of their gatherings. The cult had feared that Samantha would expose their activities to the authorities and had decided to silence her. They had found the man, who was vulnerable due to his mental illness, and convinced him to carry out the killing on their behalf. The revelation shocked the town of Millfield and sent shockwaves throughout the country. The cult members were arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder, along with several other charges related to their activities. The trial was long and arduous, with the cult members vehemently denying any involvement in Samantha Lewis' murder. But the evidence was overwhelming, and they were eventually found guilty on all charges. The town of Millfield was left reeling from the revelation that their community had been infiltrated by a dangerous cult. They struggled to come to terms with the fact that such evil could exist in their peaceful town. But in the aftermath of the trial, the community rallied together. They vowed to never forget Samantha Lewis and the tragedy that had occurred, but they also resolved to move forward and build a safer, more united community. The town held a memorial service for Samantha, which was attended by hundreds of people who wanted to pay their respects and honor her memory. And as the service came to a close, a feeling of hope and resilience filled the air. The town of Millfield had been through a dark time, but they had emerged stronger and more united than ever before. Despite the harrowing experience the town of Millfield had gone through, the sense of unity and hope persisted. The community banded together, holding regular meetings to discuss how they could make their town safer and more resilient against outside threats. In the wake of the cult's exposure, the town's law enforcement agencies implemented new training and protocols to better deal with any potential cult or criminal activity. The town also organized a community outreach program, inviting mental health experts to speak about the importance of addressing mental illness. Moreover, the tragedy of Samantha Lewis inspired a wave of activism in the community. Residents started volunteering and advocating for mental health and awareness. Local charities and support groups were formed to help victims of crime, particularly those dealing with the aftermath of traumatic events. The town became a beacon of resilience and a testament to the human spirit. It was no longer just a place on a map, but a community that had come together in the face of adversity. Over the years, the tragedy of Samantha Lewis continued to haunt the town of Millfield, but it also served as a reminder of the importance of staying vigilant and united against any threats to their safety and well-being. Samantha's memory lived on through the acts of kindness and the positive changes that had been brought about in the wake of her murder. Her family found solace in knowing that their daughter's death had not been in vain and that she had inspired a movement for change in their town. And so, the town of Millfield continued to move forward, not forgetting the past, but using it as a foundation for a brighter, safer future. Years went by, and the town of Millfield remained a peaceful and tight-knit community. It had grown in population and prosperity, but its core values and resilience remained unchanged. As the years passed, new generations of Millfield residents emerged, who had no direct connection to the tragedy of Samantha Lewis, but who had grown up hearing the stories and the lessons learned from that dark chapter in their town's history. Despite the town's ongoing prosperity, some people still couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. They wondered if there were any other dangerous groups or individuals hiding in the shadows, waiting to strike at any moment. One such individual was a man named Peter, who had just moved into town. He was a loner, rarely seen in public, and had a mysterious past. Despite this, no one suspected him of anything sinister, as they believed that their town had moved past the tragedy of Samantha Lewis. However, things began to change when a group of teenagers stumbled upon something in the woods that sent shockwaves through the community. They found what appeared to be a shrine, surrounded by symbols and strange markings. The authorities were called, and an investigation was launched. As the investigation deepened, it became clear that the shrine was the work of a new cult that had formed in Millfield. The cult was made up of individuals who shared Peter's dark obsession with death and murder. As the authorities closed in, the cult went into hiding, but Peter remained elusive. He seemed to be one step ahead of the authorities, and no one knew where he was or what he was planning. As fear and paranoia spread throughout the town once again, the authorities turned to an unlikely source for help. They reached out to the family of Samantha Lewis, who had become something of a symbol of hope and resilience in the town. Samantha's family, despite the pain that the past had caused them, agreed to help. They worked tirelessly with law enforcement agencies, providing any information they could to help bring the cult to justice. In the end, Peter was caught, and the cult was disbanded. But the town of Millfield knew that they could never let their guard down again. They had learned that evil could come in many forms and that they needed to remain vigilant and united against any threats to their safety and well-being. As the town moved forward once again, they did so with the knowledge that their strength and resilience came not from forgetting the past, but from using it to build a brighter future. As the town of Millfield breathed a sigh of relief, believing that the threat of the cult and Peter had been neutralized, a shadowy figure watched from the distance. The figure had been lurking in the shadows, biding their time, waiting for the right moment to strike. No one in Millfield knew who this person was or what their intentions were, but the sense of unease that had plagued the town in the aftermath of Samantha Lewis's murder began to creep back in. The people of Millfield knew that they couldn't let their guard down again, that they had to remain vigilant and united against any potential threats to their town's safety and well-being. The question remained, who was this shadowy figure, and what did they want from the town of Millfield? The answer would remain a mystery, for now, leaving the town on edge and uncertain of what the future held. Sure, here's a horror story for you. The House on the Hill. John and his friends, Alice and Tom, were on their way to a weekend retreat in a secluded cabin in the woods. They had heard rumors about a haunted house on the hill, but they laughed it off and continued on their way. As they approached the cabin, they noticed the old, abandoned house looming in the distance. John, hey guys, check out that creepy house on the hill. Maybe we should go check it out tonight. Alice, no way, John. That place looks haunted. I don't want to get involved in any spooky stuff. Tom, come on, Alice. Don't be such a scaredy cat. It'll be fun. As the night fell, the trio decided to investigate the house. They made their way up the hill, and the closer they got to the house, the more uneasy they felt. The house was decrepit and run down, with boarded up windows and a sagging roof. But something about it was drawing them in. John, this place gives me the creeps. Let's just take a quick look and get out of here. Alice, I don't like this, guys. We shouldn't be here. Tom, relax, Alice. We're just checking it out. There's nothing to be afraid of. As they stepped inside the house, they were met with darkness and silence. The floorboards creaked under their feet as they made their way through the rooms. Suddenly, they heard a noise coming from upstairs. John, did you guys hear that? Tom, yeah, let's go check it out. Alice, I really don't think we should. But before she could finish her sentence, the three friends made their way up the creaky staircase. As they reached the top, they found a room with a door slightly ajar. Inside, they saw a figure sitting in a rocking chair, facing away from them. John, hello? Is anyone there? The figure slowly turned around, revealing a gaunt, pale face with empty, soulless eyes. Its mouth opened, and a chilling voice filled the room. Figure, get out. This is not your place. John, what are you talking about? We're just. Figure, get out now. Suddenly, the figure lunged forward, revealing long, sharp claws. The friends turned and ran down the stairs, but they could hear the figure chasing them. As they burst out of the front door, they saw that the house had transformed into a sinister, twisted version of itself. The windows were now glowing with an otherworldly light, and the doors had become twisted and warped. Alice, what's happening? Why is the house changing? John, I don't know, but we need to get out of here. They ran down the hill, but the figure was still chasing them. As they reached the cabin, they saw that it too had been transformed into a twisted, dark version of itself. The friends were trapped. Tom, what do we do? How do we stop this? John, I don't know, but we have to try something. As they huddled together, they realized that the figure was now standing in front of them, blocking their escape. Figure, you should not have come here. You do not belong. Alice, please, let us go. We didn't mean any harm. Figure, it is too late for that. You have trespassed into my domain, and now you must pay the price. The figure raised its claws, and the friends closed their eyes, bracing for the worst. But then, suddenly, a bright light filled the area, and the figure let out a blood-curdling scream. The friends opened their eyes to see a group of people in white robes, holding torches and chanting in a language they didn't understand. The figure slowly faded away, and the twisted versions of the house and cabin returned to their normal forms. John, what just happened? One of the robed figures approached them and spoke in a calm voice. Figure, you stumbled upon an ancient ritual site. We have been guarding it for centuries, and we do not take kindly to intruders. You were fortunate that we were able to intervene before the figure claimed you as its own. Alice, thank you for saving us. Tom, but what was that figure? What did it want? Figure, it is better left unknown. But now that you have seen our world, you cannot leave without taking an oath of secrecy. You must swear to never speak of this place to anyone else, or face the consequences. The friends hesitated, but they knew they had no choice. They took the oath, and the robed figures led them safely back to their cabin. The rest of the weekend was uneventful, but the friends couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered with them. As they drove away from the cabin, they saw the old, abandoned house on the hill in the distance. It looked normal, but they knew that they had seen a glimpse of the dark secrets that lay hidden within. They vowed to never speak of what they had witnessed, and to never return to that place again. Years went by, and the friends had gone their separate ways, but they still kept in touch. They rarely talked about the incident at the haunted house, and when they did, it was with hushed voices and nervous glances. One day, John received a package in the mail. It was a simple brown box with no return address. He opened it, and inside he found a black book with strange symbols etched on the cover. He flipped through the pages and found a handwritten note from one of the robed figures they had encountered years ago. The note read, "We have been watching you, John. We know that you have broken your oath of secrecy. You must return to the house on the hill and make amends, or face the consequences." John's heart raced as he read the note. He had never spoken of the incident to anyone else, but he knew that he had broken his promise by confiding in his wife. He tried to dismiss the note as a prank, but he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over him. He decided to confront his friends about the note. They were hesitant at first, but eventually, they all agreed to return to the house on the hill and make things right. As they approached the house, they saw that it had fallen into even more disrepair. The boards on the windows were now missing, and the roof had caved in. They cautiously made their way inside and found the same room where they had encountered the figure years ago. "John, we're here. We've come to make amends." There was no response. The room was still and silent. "Alice, is anyone there?" Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind them. They were trapped. "Tom, what's going on? Why won't the door open?" "John, I don't know, but we have to find a way out." As they searched the room, they found a hidden compartment in the floor. Inside, they found the same black book that John had received in the mail. It was open to a page with a strange incantation written in a language they didn't recognize. "Alice, what is this? What does it say?" "John, I don't know, but I have a feeling we're about to find out." As they read the incantation aloud, the room began to shake. The floorboards creaked and groaned, and the walls started to crack. Suddenly, the figure appeared before them once again, more terrifying than ever. "Figure, you have broken your oath of secrecy. Now you must pay the price." "John, please, we didn't mean any harm. We just..." "Figure, silence. You have trespassed into our world, and now you must face the consequences." The figure raised its claws, and the friends closed their eyes, bracing for the worst. But then, the floor beneath them opened up, and they were sucked into a swirling vortex of light and darkness. When they opened their eyes, they found themselves back in the cabin, safe and sound. The haunted house on the hill was nowhere to be seen. They looked at each other in disbelief, unsure of what had just happened. "John, what was that? Did we just travel through time?" "Alice, I don't know, but I never want to go through anything like that again." "Tom, I think it's safe to say that we've learned our lesson. We'll never break our oath of secrecy again." And with that, they packed up their things and left the cabin, never to return to the house on the hill again. As they drove away from the cabin, the friends couldn't help but feel that they had left something behind. They had faced their fears and made amends, but they couldn't shake the feeling that they had missed something important. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. The friends had gone back to their normal lives, but they still thought about the haunted house on the hill from time to time. Then one day, John received another package in the mail. It was a letter from one of the robed figures they had encountered at the ritual site. The letter read, "We thank you for making amends. You have proven yourselves worthy. We have one final task for you. You must return to the house on the hill and retrieve the artifact that was left behind." John showed the letter to his friends, and they knew that they had no choice but to return to the haunted house one final time. They drove up to the hill and found that the house had been restored to its former glory. It was now a beautiful mansion, with well-manicured lawns and sparkling windows. As they made their way inside, they found the same room where they had encountered the figure years ago. The room was empty, except for a pedestal in the center. On top of the pedestal was a glowing orb, pulsing with a soft white light. "Alice, is that the artifact they want us to retrieve?" "John, I think so. But we have to be careful. Who knows what could happen if we touch it?" "Tom, we don't have a choice. We have to take it back to them." As they approached the pedestal, the orb grew brighter and brighter. Suddenly, the figure appeared before them once again. "Figure, you have completed your task. Hand over the artifact, and you may leave in peace." "John, but what is this thing? What does it do?" "Figure, it is a powerful object, one that we have been guarding for centuries. We cannot reveal its secrets to those who are not worthy." "Alice, but what happens if we don't give it back to you?" "Figure, then you will face the consequences. You do not want to know what lies beyond that door." The figure pointed to a door at the far end of the room. The friends hesitated, but they knew that they couldn't risk angering the figure. They handed over the orb and left the haunted house on the hill for the final time. As they drove away, they couldn't help but wonder what secrets the orb held. They had faced their fears and completed their task, but they knew that their encounter with the haunted house on the hill would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Days after returning the orb, the friends began to notice strange things happening around them. They would hear whispers in the wind, see shadows in the corner of their eyes, and experience unexplainable events that left them questioning their sanity. Alice, do you guys feel like we're being followed? Tom, I don't know. Maybe we're just being paranoid. John, no, I feel it too. It's like something is watching us. As the days went by, the friends became more and more convinced that something was wrong. They decided to investigate the orb and find out what it was that they had handed over to the mysterious figure. They discovered that the orb was a powerful object that had been used in ancient rituals to summon otherworldly beings. These beings were said to be able to grant wishes and make people's dreams come true, but at a great cost. They would demand a sacrifice in return, often something that the person cherished the most. John, we have to get that orb back. We can't let those beings use it for their own purposes. Tom, but how are we going to get it back? We don't even know who those figures were or where they are now. Alice, we have to find them. We have to make them give us back the orb. The friends set out on a quest to find the figures and retrieve the orb. They searched high and low, through forests and across rivers, until they finally came across a group of figures performing a ritual similar to the one they had seen years ago. John, we have to act fast. We can't let them finish the ritual. Tom, but how are we going to stop them? We don't even know what we're up against. Alice, we have to use our fear against them. We have to show them that we're not afraid anymore. The friends charged towards the figures, shouting and screaming, using their fear as a weapon. The figures were taken aback, and they retreated, leaving the orb behind. As the friends picked up the orb, they felt a surge of power coursing through their veins. But they also knew that they had just unleashed something dangerous into the world. They didn't know what kind of beings would come forth from the orb, or what they would demand in return. John, we have to destroy it. We can't let anyone else use it. Tom, but how? It's too powerful. We can't just throw it away. Alice, we have to go back to the haunted house on the hill. That's where it all began, and that's where it should end. The friends drove back up to the haunted house on the hill, and as they entered the room where they had found the orb, they heard a voice calling out to them. Voice, you have unleashed a power that you cannot control. The consequences will be dire. John, who are you? Voice, I am the guardian of the orb. I have been waiting for someone like you to come and take it back to where it belongs. Alice, but what will happen to us? What about the beings that were summoned? Voice, they will return to where they came from. But you will have to pay a price for your actions. You will be marked forever, and your lives will never be the same. As the friends placed the orb back on the pedestal, they felt a surge of energy coursing through their bodies. They knew that their lives would never be the same again, but they also knew that they had done the right thing. As they left the haunted house on the hill for the final time, they couldn't help but feel relieved that it was all over. But, suddenly, a gust of wind blew through the trees, and they heard a faint whisper. Whisper, you may have returned the orb, but the beings that were summoned have not left this world. They are still here, waiting for their sacrifice. The friends turned around, but there was no one there. They knew that they had only just begun to face the consequences of their actions, and they wondered what else was in store for them. As they drove away from the haunted house on the hill, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. They didn't know what kind of horrors awaited them in the future, but they knew that they would have to face them together. And with that, the story ends on a cliffhanger, leaving the fate of the friends and the world they live in uncertain.